In a world where any Pokemon that faints has to be boxed forever, and the challenge only allows you to capture the first water type per route. Meet our hero, a 10-year-old dressed like a retired British man who just discovered golf, and his special companion Piplup.
Actually, he's got a special attack IV of 2.
And his not-so-special Piplup named IKEA to reference his Swedish heritage, which is a bit on the nose if you ask me. Introducing Antler Boy's Pokemon Platinum Hardcore Nuzlocke, now in 3D.
What do you mean 3D? It's a YouTube video, what the
I begin our wholesome adventure like any other Pokemon game, by betting against kids on monster fighting and taking their lunch money. It's not a moral victory, but it is victory. Our first fight against an actual adult is versus the first gym leader Rourke, who has a pretty bad time no matter which starter you choose. His lead Geodude is of course quad weak to water and instantly falls to a bubble. However, because of IKEA's abysmal special attack IV, a bubble is not enough to take out Onix. Despite that, we only take 6 damage from an incoming rock throw, since Onix has one of the worst attack stats in the game and can finish it off with a bubble the next turn. Finally, we face Rourke's ace Cranidos, which for some reason goes for Pursuit, even though we have no other Pokemon to switch to, basically giving me a free bubble. Unfortunately, Headbutt does a ton of damage, and because Cranidos is faster, I'm just gonna lose the next turn. Or rather, I would, but Cranidos just put me in Torrent range, boosting the power of my water-type moves by 50% since I'm below 30% HP. Can't believe I almost lost to Rourke the Dork. With the level cap now increased from 14 to 22, we can evolve IKEA into Prinplup. Then as I backtrack through Orberg Tunnel, I pick up Volvo the Psyduck. And as I continue tracking back towards Jubilife City, I pick up the star of the show, Bidoof. This little guy might not look like much, but trust me when I say Meatball here is definitely the main character. And I know what you're thinking, we can easily get the Old Rod at this point and just go to Route 218 to pick up a free Magikarp. However, aside from maybe Garchomp and possibly Infernape, Gyarados is by far the best encounter you can get in the entire game. And I don't feel like this challenge would be particularly hardcore if I actually allowed using it. So just like in my first ever video where I banned the use of Garchomp, this time around I won't be allowed to use Gyarados. Sorry, Sustrumming, nobody actually likes you. But without Gyarados' flying type to resist grass, what exactly are we gonna do about Gardenia? For starters, I pick up a Shellos on Route 205. We then have to fall back on our only hope. This requires us to backtrack all the way to Route 202 to fight level 2 Starlies, which in turn gets us 1 speed EV per Starly defeated at the lowest possible experience gain. We don't need very much speed, only so that we outspeed Cherim. The more important part is taking out as many level 3 Shinxes as we possibly can, because every Shinx we defeat we get 1 attack EV to boost Meatball's power. Getting all the way to level 22 this way ended up taking a really long time, since I had to run away from any Starly above level 2 or any Shinx above 3. And even after all those preparations, beating Gardenia still requires a bit of luck. If Turtwig gets to set up Reflect, it's basically over. This is why I made sure to max out Meatball's happiness so that Stab Return is a 1-hit KO. On top of that, because we start the fight almost at level 23, the KO gets us the level. With the stat boost from the level, Return is now a potential 1-hit KO against Cherim, and if we get the KO and can stay at full health, we can tank 1 non-crit from Roserade. Unfortunately, I get a low damage roll, meaning if Cherim attacks me at all, I'll be in range of Magical Leaf from Roserade, and the run is over. However, Cherim goes for Leech Seed, which does deal a bit of damage to us at the end of the turn, but even after 1 round of Leech Seed, we still have a small chance to survive Magical Leaf from Roserade. We do have to shake off the Leech Seed though, which requires drastic measures. I swap in Volvo as Gardenia heals all the way up to full with a Super Potion. She then fires off a Magical Leaf, which Volvo thankfully survives in the red. This actually makes a huge difference, since the small chip damage we can do with Confusion guarantees the KO with Return. The price of this progress is sadly Volvo's life, but it's comparatively a pretty small price to pay considering the alternative is restarting the game. After defeating Cherim, Meatball should be healthy enough to tank a Magical Leaf, but Meatball doesn't even have to worry about being crit, outspeeding Roserade with a Quick Claw proc and taking it out in 1 return. Our low roll return did cost us Psyduck, but at least this way we're still in the game. But perhaps not for very long, because the fight versus Fantina is incredibly close, and her Mismagius has Magical Leaf, and we can't get any new encounters before the fight, so we're stuck with these 3. Platinum Fantina is notoriously difficult. She's got an incredibly strong team for this point in the game. Her lead Duskull is incredibly annoying, and we can't actually lead with Meatball here, since if we get burned by Will-O-Wisp, we just lose the game on the spot. So instead it's IKEA who unfortunately has to take the burn. Despite the first Bubble Beam falling short of taking Duskull below half, a second one is still enough to take it out with a slightly higher roll. pole. Having only taken 2 turns of burn damage, this means I can take any hit from Mismagius as long as it's not a crit. Unfortunately, this also means Mismagius goes for Confuse Ray instead of an attacking move, but Ikea manages to pull through and does a bit of damage with Bubble Beam. At this point, Magical Leaf plus Burn is a definite KO, so I've got to swap into Shellos. Now, I'm a big fan of Shellos. I used a Shellos on my first ever Pokemon Diamond team, but in this attempt, Shellos got to see a total of 2 turns. Sorry, Shellos fans, and goodbye, Canelbola. But Shellos' sacrifice gives Meatball an opening. We of course get immediately hit by a Magical Leaf, which unfortunately does just over half. And just as I'd given up hope for attempt 1, Meatball strikes again with a critical hit Thief. And this crit matters immensely, since the highest roll Meatball could have possibly gotten would still leave Mismagius in the red. But we still have to deal with Haunter, and Meatball immediately gets a Quick Claw proc to take Haunter down into the red with another Thief. But even this close to victory, we could still be in pretty big trouble. Haunter puts me to sleep with Hypnosis, and Fantina undoes all of my great damage with a Super Potion. Then Haunter goes for Confuse Ray, and at about half health, we really can't afford to hit ourselves very many times. Beyond Hypnosis and Confuse Ray, Haunter can't hit us with Shadow Claw, so it opts to go for Sucker Punch. I can make Sucker Punch fail by clicking Defense Curl, but after waking up, I hit myself in Confusion. It's a fairly decent idea to switch out to shake the Confusion off here, since both Hypnosis and Confuse Ray have fairly shaky accuracy. That of course doesn't seem to apply to Haunter, who seems to be hitting every single time. On top of that, Ikea hits itself in Confusion, which combined with burn damage takes me dangerously low. Meatball then gets to switch in for free since Haunter tries to go for Shadow Claw. It then connects with another Hypnosis, despite being 60% accuracy, meaning Meatball spends the turn snoozing. I then bait out another one of Haunter's 5 Sucker Punch PP by going for Defense Curl, which I actually get to use after waking up. Haunter then gives me no room to breathe by putting me back to sleep immediately. I then, the second time in a row, get a first turn wake up and go for Defense Curl to waste another Sucker Punch. Finally, we make some actual progress, getting a Quick Claw proc to outspeed Haunter and get it down into the red again with Thief. After which Haunter, of course, hits another Hypnosis. I of course click Defense Curl again, which wastes Haunter's final Sucker Punch, meaning it now resorts to Confuse Ray. I might be able to survive hitting myself in Confusion one more time, but I really need to try and shake this off and get a Quick Claw proc, so I swap out into Primplop, who after burn damage is extremely dead to Shadow Claw, so I can safely swap back into Meatball, who's unfortunately still asleep and immediately gets confused again. So I'm kinda back in the exact same sticky position, and at this point I can't swap out into Primplop, who's too low. Out of Sucker Punches, Haunter relentlessly goes for Confuse Ray, and upon waking up, Meatball hits himself in Confusion, and then immediately gets put to sleep again. Haunter is just gonna keep going for Confuse Ray, and as soon as Meatball wakes up, there's a 50-50 chance that I lose the run on the spot. Meatball then wakes up, and please, this is the worst possible way I could lose a run. But Meatball does it again. With a Thief, we steal victory from the depths of defeat. And what a victory it is. Despite having lost half of our available encounters at the moment, it's once again a small price to pay to not lose, especially since we're now out of the Nightmare early game. With access to Salacion Ruins, we can pick up the first Water Stone, making it worthwhile to backtrack to Hearthome City to pick up Eevee. Technically, I could have gone to the Underground as early as Eterna City to dig for a Water Stone, which would have given us another to take on Fantina. I just opted not to since it saved me a ton of time to not dig through the Underground when Vaporeon only gets normal moves before Fantina's level cap anyway. Before we take on Maylene, we can pick up several new encounters. First on Route 215, I pick up Meryl, which has thick fat instead of huge power. I then head south past Veilstone to Route 213 where I find a Wingull. The reason I've traveled so far from our destination is to get to the Great Marsh and pick up a Wooper. This is really important since we just lost Shellos and are in desperate need of a ground type. Having acquired a full team of 6, we go into the fight versus the 4th gym leader Maylene. The first thing I do is use the tried and true strategy of Meatball going for return to one-shot Meditite. Machoke comes in second, and because I have those speed EVs, Meatball is faster and can deal a ton of damage with return before I get hit by Rock Tomb. And after Rock Tomb's speed drop, I'm no longer faster than Machoke, and I'm in range of being KO'd by a crit Karate Chop, so I swap out into Abba the Pelipper. This way, I resist the hit coming in and can take out Machoke the following turn with a wing attack. Finally, we face Lucario, and I decide to stay in since it only has resisted moves against Abba. This line of thinking gets me punished immediately with a paralysis from Force Palm, and at least my misfortune is reciprocated by Maylene as she gets confused by Water Pulse. Because I'm now paralyzed, I decide decide to swap out, sending in the king. Lucario unfortunately hits me through confusion, but at least I don't get paralyzed. Honestly, it feels like the AI never gets punished for bad accuracy or confusion, because Lucario breaks through again and gets me paralyzed. Thankfully, I don't get fully paralyzed, connecting with a super effective earthquake to finish off the fight. We'll be just as happy to send both of yous crying home to your mommies. Mommy! The level cap then just barely allows us to fully evolve IKEA right before the water-on-water showdown versus Crasher Wake. It's here we have to face our first enemy, Gyarados. After Intimidate, our physical attacks will barely be doing anything. But in case you didn't know, B-Barrel gets access to Thunder. With a held wide lens from the game corner, we can even boost its accuracy to be kinda decent. And since we have a level advantage of 4, we take it out in one hit. Big Bad Floatzel comes out next, and I decide to stay in to tank a Crunch, which immediately gets a critical hit. I then connect with my second Thunder, thank you Wide Lens, which does a ton of damage to Floatzel, activating its Citrus Berry. In range of another Crunch, I decide to swap out, sending in our newly evolved IKEA. And because this is pre-Generation 6, Steel is a much more broken defensive typing, allowing us to resist Dark. I can then pull out my second secret weapon, the Grass Knot TM that we got from Gardenia, which is enough to take out Floatzel, perfectly setting us up for Quagsire. Technically, this is a bad matchup for us, but Quagsire being 3 levels lower and cripplingly weak to grass, we can take it out in one hit to claim our 5th gym badge. This lets us go to Celestic Town, which is a major milestone for our water types. Not only can we get the 95 base power HM03 Surf, which basically every single one of our encounters can learn, but if we boot up the game early enough and talk to the bespectacled man in this quaint shop, we can receive what's by far the most powerful item you can get in pre-Elite 4 Platinum, the Choice Specs. This item changes everything, since we can now basically start a Pokemon out at +1 special attack at the cost of being locked into a single move. Being locked into a move really isn't that bad, especially when gym leaders are confined to a single type of Pokemon. Byron, for instance, has Steel types, but Magneton can't take a hit, and the other two are both weak to water. And even though Bastiodon has massive special defense, a Stab super effective Choice Specs boosted Surf is enough to take it out in one hit. Oh, I can't wait for him to walk between us and be forced to Pokemon battle. Yeah, boy, we're gonna end this attempt. Hey, what are you doing? You can't just skip us. That's cheating. What the f? I then use my overpowered glasses to wash away Team Galactic, after which I begin one of the most tedious processes of any run I've ever played. With access to Mount Coronet, I can now go through the grueling task of trying to find a Feebas. If you've ever attempted this before, you know it sucks. Basically, you just have to move around tile to tile, checking every single one, where you only have a 50% chance to find a Feebas, if it's even the right tile. This is seriously one of the biggest wastes of time you can possibly pursue in any Pokemon game, and I was lucky that it only took just over an hour for me to find my fish. The worst part is you now have to collect berries and spend even more time than you did searching for the fish making Poffins. Finally, only when you max out Feebas's beauty, you get your Milotic, which is like such a terrible trade-off. I can't believe I just did this for the second time in my life. So subscribe. The worst part is Milotic doesn't even really help us against the 7th gym leader Candice. However, that's not exactly the fault of Milotic being bad, but rather a feature of Empoleon being completely busted. After defeating Byron, he gave us exactly what we need to win this fight, the TM for Flash Cannon. With Stab, this is an incredibly powerful move. And because all of Candice's Pokemon are weak to it, it's not exactly a drawback that we'd lock ourselves in. After beating Sneasel, we're simply faster than both Piloswine and Abomasnow, which get obliterated in one hit each. Frostlass does outspeed, but with only resisted moves, it can't really touch us, and we knock it out with a Flash Cannon at the end of the turn. And this means we gotta start dealing with Team Galactic. And unfortunately, while facing Saturn at the headquarters, I thought I was recording, but clearly wasn't. Before I could use Fly, Toxicroak hit me with a nasty critical hit Poison Jab, which also left me poisoned. Abba then immediately fell to poison after flying up high. Having lost my only flying type, I knew I needed to get revenge. And taking out the other Galactic commanders was the easy part. All I did was give the choice specs to Sue Strumming and spam Surf for the victory. But the commanders were never who I was worried about. about. We've now left the comfortable mid-game and entered into the nightmare endgame. And even though we have a great type advantage against Cyrus's lead Houndoom, he immediately gets a critical hit to start off the fight. This really stinks, and I know Surströmming always does, but this basically means I can't use my Lodic to tank hits in the future. At least I'm able to knock out Houndoom, which sends in Gyarados. And this Gyarados is a lot stronger than Wake's. For starters, this thing actually has a crazy move pool, including Earthquake, meaning we can't send an Empoleon against it under any circumstances at all. Unfortunately, Earthquake also does just a bit over half of Meatball's health, meaning I've got no chance to stay in and go for a Thunder. At this point, I'd grown so used to the comfy mid-game that I wasn't even calcing, which is why this fight seriously caught me by surprise. After switching out of Meatball, I basically panic sacrificed Azumarill, but let's be honest, without huge power, it's basically only useful for HMs. I send in the King, and Gyarados tries to go for Waterfall straight into my Water Absorb. This gives me a free turn to go for Yawn before Gyarados misses Giga Impact, and I hit it for some chip damage with Ice Beam. Gyarados then falls asleep, and even though the King can't deal any good damage, I really can't swap anybody else in here since everybody's at too low health or cripplingly weak to Earthquake. After a few turns of dealing pretty pathetic damage with Ice Beam to get Gyarados below half, it wakes up and hits me with Earthquake, which does about a third. And just as I was contemplating exactly what to do after Cyrus heals up to full, I managed to get a freeze. This is huge since I can now swap Surströmming back in and heal all the way back up to full with a couple of recovers. Gyarados then thaws out, but oddly goes for Giga Impact, which actually kind of helps me out. My Ice Beam at the end of the turn doesn't do enough to take Gyarados out. In fact, Cyrus would heal the next turn if not for the fact that Gyarados has to recharge after going for Giga Impact, thus giving me a perfect opportunity to take it out. Honchkrow comes out next, so I swap out and send in Vaporeon. And just like with B-Barrel, I'm in for a rude awakening since Drill Peck does way over half. It isn't even a critical hit, and I really should have swapped in Empoleon immediately. I get Heat Waved after the Drill Peck on the switch, which actually takes Ikea down below half before I can take Honchkrow out with a Specs boosted Ice Beam. Cyrus then sends in Weavile, and because I'm locked into Ice Beam with Specs, I swap out into Vaporeon. Sadly, the fake out on the switch and the Ice Punch the following turn is enough to take down the Evolution. Sorry it had to end this way, buddy. Now I can send back in Ikea, who actually resists all of Weavile's moves. Steel's just an absolutely busted type before Gen 6, and because I swapped out, I can now switch up my moves and go for a Flash Cannon to take out Weavile. Finally, this only leaves us with Crobat, but locked into Flash Cannon, there's really nothing Ikea can do, so I swap out into Surströmming. I'm at just enough health so I could survive a crit Air Slash here before I swap back out into Ikea, expecting a poison move. Crobat hits me for 16 damage with an Air Slash, and I flinch. I've then got just enough HP to survive another Air Slash. After a second flinch, we're in pretty big trouble. At this point, the entire team is pretty low on HP, and the only one I can really switch to is the King. I get lucky as Crobat hits the 5% chance to miss Air Slash, and I then get a Quick Claw proc to go for Yawn. And then Crobat goes for Confuse Ray. Not again. The next turn it goes for Air Slash, meaning I now have both a chance to flinch and hit myself in confusion. But they don't call him the King for no reason. Quagsire connects with an Ice Beam, dealing a slightly disappointing amount of damage as Crobat falls asleep at the end of the turn. I then get another Quick Claw proc and amazingly break through confusion to land a second Ice Beam in a row, which takes Crobat into the red. Cyrus then heals up with a full restore as the King incredibly hits a third move through confusion in a row, but the Yawn never actually takes effect since the King snaps out of confusion, firing off an Ice Beam before Crobat gets to move and landing the second freeze of the fight. Because of freeze, I can freely hit 2 more Ice Beams in a row, not taking any damage whatsoever, meaning all 4 of my remaining Pokemon survive. That's why he's the King, ladies and gentlemen, what can I say? With a third of my team decimated, I need to pick up some new Pokemon, starting with Barboach on Route 212. This is mostly so I have a backup plan to switch to if I can't take on Volkner with Quagsire alone. However, this really doesn't end up being a problem, and I completely understand why Volkner's such a depressive dude. I mean, I'd be pretty depressed if my entire entire existence was just getting bodied by Earthquake over and over again. With our sights now set on the Pokemon League, I pick up my final encounter on the way there on Route 224. Tentacruel is both fast and strong, making it an excellent addition to the team. And thus we've assembled the crew, starting with Ikea the Empoleon running Surf, Ice Beam, Flash Cannon, and Grass Knot. Second is Meatball, the simple B-Barrel with Waterfall, Return, Curse, and Amnesia. Quagsire the King with Earthquake, Waterfall, Ice Beam, and Yawn. Surströmming with Surf, Ice Beam, Recover, and Toxic. Semla the Whiscash with Earthquake, Waterfall, Ice Beam, and Rock Slide. And finally, Taxes the Tentacruel with Surf, Sludge Bomb, Ice Beam, and Giga Drain. In the early fights, we have a big level advantage since the level cap is Lucian's highest level Pokemon. This means my Wise Glasses Tentacruel can easily outspeed Yanmega and take it out with a single Ice Beam, no problem. Heracross comes out second, and I kind of foolishly stay in here going for Surf, which does a bit over half. Even with the level advantage, Tentacruel's physical defense isn't that good, and I was still dead to crit here despite being 6 levels higher. In hindsight, I really should have swapped in Quagsire, but I defeat Heracross with a second Surf. Vespiquen comes out third, so I swap out into Specs Empoleon as it goes for Defend Order to boost its defense and special defense. A Specs Ice Beam does great damage even after the special defense boost, but it doesn't look like I can take the KO after it boosts up again. However, Empoleon decides to not waste any time by just getting a crit and taking it out immediately. Scizor comes out fourth, but locked into Ice Beam, Ikea's not doing any good, so I swap out into Semla. I take an X-Scissor on the switch, and after the second X-Scissor, I'm left pretty low. I at least deal half with Earthquake before I'm forced to switch out, sending in Quagsire. The same exact thing happens here where I get taken low by a couple of X-Scissors before getting to use my move and taking out Scizor with Earthquake. Now, even though we have a massive advantage against Drapion with Earthquake here, we're at too low health to stay in, so I swap out into Ikea to tank the resisted X-Scissor. This is once again a display of exactly how broken the Steel type is, since Drapion has no way to hit us for anything but resisted damage. We don't have any super effective moves to hit back with, but Choice Spec Surf deals a ton of damage, and after taking a third X-Scissor, Ikea finishes off the fight with another Spec Surf. A pretty manageable fight for our water types, but the 2 next Elite Four members only get easier from here. Bertha, the master of ground types, has a crippling weakness to water, which is just about the only thing we have an abundance of. She does lead with a Whiscash, which isn't weak to water, but because Taxes learns Giga Drain, we can easily take it out with the quad effective hit. Hippowdon then comes in to set up the Sand, which raises the special defense of all rock types by 50%. Unfortunately, both her rock types take 400% damage from water type moves, so it won't exactly save her. Hippowdon is actually her only Pokemon we don't hit for 4 times damage since we have Ice Beam for Gliscor. Then there's her 2 rock types, Golem and Rhyperior, which, as I said, just get completely wrecked by water moves. 5 Pokemon, 5 turns to win. Doesn't get better than that. After Bertha, there's Flint, who's kind of in the same boat since he's also cripplingly weak to water. Except in this case, the strategy's actually even simpler. Unlike against Bertha where we actually had to switch up moves, all of Flint's Pokemon are weak to water, so we can simply slap Choice Specs onto Taxes and watch as he outspeeds every single one of Flint's Pokemon and takes them out in one hit. Sorry, Flint, but you never had a chance in a water type run. This is where things really start to get scary. Lucian has a ton of great coverage, and if we make it to Cynthia, I'm not sure we'll have an intact team. Because his Mr. Mime has a Thunderbolt, I lead with Semla, and oddly Mr. Mime goes for Light Screen, which makes my Earthquake deal a lot more damage than it would have if he set up Reflect. I take Mr. Mime into the red, which actually kind of works out in my favor since it makes Lucian waste a full restore as I take him back into the red. He then hits me with a Psychic for almost half as I finish off what's left of its health. Second out is one of Lucian's scariest Pokemon, Alakazam. There's no way I'm switching anything into this thing, so I kind of just have to stay in and watch Semla go down. From here, we have to just pray as I send in Empoleon, and Alakazam actually hits its Focus Miss. But switching in anything else would also just be a sack. Somehow, Empoleon actually survives, and ironically, if Mr. Mime hadn't set up Light Screen, this Surf would be a KO. With only 2 HP remaining, Alakazam is going for a random move here, but I take the chance and go into Taxes as Alakazam goes for Energy Ball. If that would have been Psychic, it would have been a bad day at the tax office. With Light Screen now expired, I can then easily take out Alakazam with a Surf. Third out is Espeon, and since I'm not confident Taxes can take it out in one hit, I definitely need to switch since I for sure get one-shot by Psychic. Surströmming overleveling takes a ton of damage from Psychic, but not quite half, meaning I can survive a second one and fire off a Surf. This only chips Espeon down a bit, and having to switch, I really wish Empoleon had more HP. This is yet another instance where Steel just resists every single move that Espeon has, but that doesn't really do you any good if you only have 2 hit points left. Sadly, this means I've got to sacrifice the king, so thank God this isn't chess. With Quagsire's noble sacrifice, Taxes can come in and finish off Espeon with a Surf. Fourth out is Bronzong, a very strange mixed set with Psychic and Gyro Ball that likes to set up with Calm Mind. And if it's a setup war Lucian wants, then that's exactly what he'll get. With the simple ability, a Pokemon gets double the stat boosts, meaning Meatball's Amnesia sets me up to +4 special defense. After Bronzong hits me with a Psychic, I set up with Curse, which lowers my speed by 2 and increases attack and defense by 2. Having this ability means Meatball is actually extremely efficient at setting up stats, and after only 3 turns, we've got 12 boosts. Sure, we're now slower than Bronzong because of Curse, and we take a bit more damage from the second Psychic after it set up another Calm Mind, but we get most of that health back from a Citrus Berry anyway, and since Bronzong never boosted its defense, a +4 stab waterfall is easily enough to knock it out from full HP. Besides, against Lucian's final Pokemon, the speed drop doesn't matter since Gallade would outspeed Meatball anyway. Leaf Blade is very scary since if we get crit, it's all over. But Meatball keeps overperforming and once again saves the day. At +4 defense, we easily survive the non-crit and take Gallade out with a +4 stab return. And while that means we beat the Elite Four, we now only have 4 Pokemon going into the final fight versus Cynthia. Half of our team is weak to Garchomp's Earthquake, and a quarter of our team is a freaking B-Barrel. There's no real great way to execute this. There are some Pokemon we're gonna need to fight some of hers, but generally, we're at a pretty hefty disadvantage here. Spiritomb is another one of the now countless examples of Pokemon that can only hit Steel type for resisted damage, meaning I only need to take about a 1/6 of Ikea's health before taking Spiritomb out with a second Surf. Unfortunately, this immediately baits in Garchomp, and anything I switch into instantly gets KO'd or 2-hit KO'd by Earthquake. Trading Pokemon 1 for 1 like this is not a way that I can win, so I'll have to make sure sacrificing my starter was worth it. Now with only half a team left, I send in Taxes, who can outspeed Garchomp to hit it with a quad-effective Ice Beam. With Garchomp down, Cynthia sends in Togekiss. I send another super effective Ice Beam, which looks like it's a 2-hit KO. Cynthia then goes for Shockwave, which seems kinda weak for a champion, but it actually does some pretty decent damage. Then despite my first Ice Beam taking Togekiss into the yellow, my second doesn't get the KO, but it does get the freeze. This causes Cynthia to use a full restore, and I get her back down to about half with another Ice Beam. Just like last time, a second Ice Beam isn't quite enough, so I have to tank another Shockwave before I can finish the job. As Cynthia sends in Roserade, we now have the same amount of Pokemon left. And because Roserade is one of the premier threats on our team, I can't afford to switch out, so I just send one final Ice Beam, taking it below half, before allowing Taxes to go down to an extra sensory. This means we're once again down a Pokemon, and both of our remaining Mons are slower than Roserade. I'm at least thankful this thing has Energy Ball instead of Giga Drain, since it would just be gaining all of its health back. Even so, we take a ton of damage from Energy Ball and don't even get back above half after a Citrus Berry. I then get to launch an Ice Beam, which is just enough to take Roserade out. Down to just 2 Pokemon of her own, Cynthia sends out Lucario. And if this Stone Edge crits, it's all over. Thankfully, we managed to survive at 15 HP, giving me the chance to recover and get all the way back up above half. Sadly, this still doesn't get us out of crit range, so Lucario gets another chance and misses out on the crit. I keep getting more and more HP back from recover, but the longer we stall, the higher the chance we get crit. A third Stone Edge connects and we are still in range, but Lucario misses out on the crit once again. Even after a third recover, we're still in range of a crit, but this time Lucario misses. This allows us to recover all the way back up to full, meaning even if Lucario crits the Stone Edge, we survive and are able to recover back. With the final Stone Edge PP used up, I feel pretty good about getting all the way back up to full HP with another recover. With Lucario now going for other moves that deal way less damage than Stone Edge, and without the extra chance to crit, I can start trying to get damage on it. My Lodic unfortunately isn't exactly a powerhouse, and we do less than half. I also have to think about really trying to play this safe, since if Surströmming dies, we only have Meatball left, who gets instantly KO'd by an Aura Sphere. So basically, if my Milotic dies, the run dies. As Cynthia heals up with a full restore after the second Surf, I make sure to go for Recover to get most of my health back, and after getting hit by another Aura Sphere, which takes me to about half, I go for another Surf. Once again, I'm getting dangerously close to being crit and taken out, so I have to start recovering up again to get to full HP. All of Lucario's moves are at least doing about the same amount of damage, so I can very easily predict when I need to go for Recover. Whenever Lucario goes for Shadow Ball, I really start holding my breath, because one special defense drop, and it's also basically over. Finally, my battle with Lucario ends when I end up getting the critical hit that Lucario was fishing for. Speaking of fishing, our final opponent is a Milotic mirror match. Immediately, I end up getting a free Toxic as Milotic tries to get me with Mirror Coat. I then get nailed by a Dragon Pulse, but I don't really have any good moves to fire back with, so I just try to get damage with Surf. As I outspeed with my next Surf, I'm pretty sure that means Milotic's going for Mirror Coat, but with one Pokemon still in the back, I just need as much damage as possible. I don't let Mirror Coat dissuade me from doing as much damage as I can, going for another Surf, even though it means Surströmming goes down. I'm sorry what I said earlier, Milotic. You were worth every second of fishing and poffin making, and I want to thank you and all of our fallen comrades for helping and allowing me and the Chosen One Meatball to beat a Pokemon Platinum Hardcore Nuzlocke using only water types. And without using Gyarados, playing through Platinum with only water types was a wild ride. It was pretty awesome to showcase exactly how powerful the Choice Specs Empoleon combo is, but in the end, you're probably always better off picking Infernape, who actually uses the Choice Specs pretty well too. But hey, let me know what challenge I should be doing next down in the comments below, and until we see each other next time, subscribe to Antler Boy, who's not in 3D, which is pretty lame if you ask me.
Well, nobody asked you, mother...